Ever have one of those days where one stupid mistake completely derails your life? Yeah, welcome to my world. My name's David, and until 3 weeks ago, I was crushing it as a tech lead at Stratix Systems in Silicon Valley. Good salary, fancy office with a view, and stock options that actually seemed worth something for once. See, Stratix wasn't just another fad startup burning through VC money. We had real tech, real customers, and we're gearing up for our Series B funding round that would have valued us at over $800 million. My team had built the core architecture that made our AI optimization engine work, and I was damn proud of it. But working 70-hour weeks for months straight does things to you. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion where you start making stupid mistakes. And boy, did I make a whopper. Our CEO, Richard, had been breathing down my neck for this investor report. Make it perfect, David. Our entire Series B depends on this. No pressure, right? Just the future of the company and everyone's jobs resting on my shoulders. The night before the deadline, I was texting with my buddy Mark while finalizing the presentation. We were venting about work stuff. Normal friend talk. I may have called our CEO some choice names and complained about his toxic leadership style and unrealistic demands from people who don't understand how code actually works. Nothing I hadn't said before, nothing particularly shocking. After finishing the report at 2 a.m., I attached all the files and hit send to our executive team and the lead investors. Then I passed out face first on my keyboard, literally. Woke up with QWERTY imprinted on my forehead. My phone started blowing up at 7:30 a.m. Missed calls from HR, my boss, the CEO. That sick feeling hit my stomach before I even knew what happened. Turns out, when attaching the final financial projections, I'd also somehow included a screenshot of my entire conversation with Mark. The one where I called Richard an egotistical man-child who couldn't code his way out of a paper bag, among other creative descriptions. The meeting that followed was brief and brutal. Richard didn't yell, which somehow made it worse. He just looked at me with this cold disappointment, like I'd killed his childhood pet. We're letting you go, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear out your desk. 5 years at the company, gone in 5 minutes. All because I was too tired to double-check my attachments. I walked out of the building in a daze, carrying my sad little box of desk plants and coffee mugs. No goodbyes, no chance to explain. Just done. The next week was a blur of existential crises and Netflix binges. Silicon Valley suddenly felt suffocating. Everywhere I looked were reminders of what I'd lost. The coffee shop where I'd worked on weekends. The bars where we'd celebrated product launches. Every street corner held another successful tech bro who hadn't torpedoed his career. I needed out, somewhere far from the startup hustle, somewhere I could breathe and figure out what the hell to do next. That's how I ended up in Reno, Nevada. Not exactly a glamorous choice, but it was cheap, relatively close, and nobody would know me there. I found a motel on the outskirts of town, one of those places with peeling wallpaper and a neon sign, missing half its letters. $40 a night, weekly rate available. Sold. My first few days in Reno were spent just existing, sleeping late, walking aimlessly through the downtown casinos, watching retirees feed their Social Security checks into slot machines, eating at diners where nobody asked what I did for a living or what my 5-year plan was. The crushing weight of failure followed me everywhere. What would I do now? Who would hire me after I'd been fired for bad-mouthing management? Would I ever work in tech again? My savings would last maybe 3 months if I was careful. I needed something, anything, to occupy my mind before the anxiety swallowed me whole. That's when I stumbled across this little flea market on the edge of town. Just a bunch of folding tables in a dusty parking lot. People selling everything from old VHS tapes to questionable antiques. I wandered through, not really looking for anything, when a table of old electronics caught my eye. The seller was this older guy with a gray ponytail and a Desert Storm veteran cap. His table was covered with computer parts that would have been cutting edge when I was still in diapers. "You know about computers?" he asked, watching me inspect an ancient motherboard. "Yeah, it's kind of my thing," I replied, not wanting to get into the whole unemployment situation. He nodded appreciatively and started showing me his rare finds, mostly junk, but I didn't have a heart to tell him. Then he pulled out this hard drive, an old IBM model from what had to be the early 80s. Bulky, heavy as a brick, probably with less storage than a modern calculator. $5 and it's yours, he said. Found it in a storage unit auction. No idea if it works, but it looks cool, right? I handed over a $5 bill, not really knowing why. Maybe it was a tech equivalent of adopting a stray puppy. Maybe I just needed something familiar to fiddle with in my motel room, instead of staring at the ceiling replaying my career collapse on loop. Either way, that $5 impulse buy was about to change everything. I just didn't know it yet. Back at the motel, I tossed the old IBM hard drive onto the nightstand next to my laptop. The room was depressingly basic. A sagging queen bed, a TV that probably predated YouTube, and a distinct smell of decades of cigarettes poorly masked by industrial cleaner. Home sweet home, at least for now. The days in Reno started blending together. Wake up, grab coffee at the diner across the street where Darlene, the 60-something waitress, would call me sugar and refill my cup without asking. Wander downtown. Maybe hit a casino for the free drinks if I played the penny slot slowly enough. Return to the motel. Repeat. In Silicon Valley, every conversation was about disruption, scaling, and funding rounds. Here in Reno, people talk about normal stuff, their kids' baseball games, the weather, how the Raiders were doing since the move to Vegas. No one cared what I did for a living, which was perfect since I currently did nothing. I struck up a friendship with Eddie, the night clerk at the motel. He was working his way through community college and had a surprisingly encyclopedic knowledge of 80s metal bands. We'd chat during his shifts, and it was refreshing to discuss Metallica instead of metadata for a change. "What brings you to Reno anyway?" he asked one night. "You don't seem like our usual guests." I gave him the abbreviated version. Tech job gone south. Needed space to think. He nodded like it made perfect sense. "Everyone who ends up in Reno is running from something or looking for something," he said. "Sometimes both." That hit harder than I expected. What was I looking for? I'd been so caught up in what I was running from, I hadn't considered the other half of the equation. The emptiness that had followed me from Silicon Valley was starting to feel like a constant companion. Without deadlines, without code to write, without problems to solve. Who was I? My entire identity had been wrapped up in being David the tech lead for so long that just David felt like a stranger. One afternoon, wandering through downtown, I found this hole-in-the-wall shop called Digital Antiquities. The windows displayed vintage computers and game consoles, from Commodore 64s to the original PlayStation. A bell jingled as I pushed open the door. The owner was this bearded guy named Alan who looked like he belonged at a craft brewery rather than running a tech collector shop. We got talking about the evolution of programming languages, and for the first time since my firing, I felt that spark of genuine interest. "You know your stuff," he commented after I went on a probably too long explanation about why COBOL still ran so many banking systems. "Used to work in tech." I replied, the word still tasting bitter. "We've got a meetup of vintage computing enthusiasts every Thursday," he offered. "Bunch of nerds talking about ancient technology while drinking beer. You'd fit right in." I promised to think about it. Those social gatherings weren't exactly on my to-do list in my current state of unemployment depression. But the conversation reminded me of something I'd always loved before the corporate tech world chewed me up. The pure joy of understanding how things worked, taking them apart, seeing the elegance in old solutions. Back at the motel, I eyed the IBM hard drive I'd bought on impulse. It sat there like a challenge, a relic from the bygone era, when computing was still mysterious and exciting. Maybe this could be my project, something to fill the empty hours and keep my brain from atrophying. I dug through my backpack for the external connector kit. I'd always kept my emergency tech repair bag. Once a nerd, always a nerd. The drive was ancient, the kind that belonged in servers the size of refrigerators. Getting it connected to my MacBook would require some serious adapter daisy chaining and possibly some creative solutions. Perfect. A problem to solve. I spent the next day hunting down the parts one needed, visiting both Allen's shop and a couple of electronics stores. The project gave me purpose, a small one, but still. For the first time since arriving in Reno, I went to bed excited to wake up the next morning. It took 2 more days of tinkering, some creative wiring, and maybe a little duct tape, but I finally jury-rigged a connection between the dinosaur drive and my modern laptop. The anticipation as my computer attempted to read the drive was the most excitement I'd felt in weeks. Probably nothing on it, I told myself. Or if there was just some ancient spreadsheets or word processor files that wouldn't open with any modern software. Still, the mystery of it was intriguing. After what felt like an eternity of whirring and clicking, my laptop finally recognized the drive. I expected it to be completely corrupted after all these years, but to my surprise, it mounted successfully. Then came the real shock. The drive wasn't empty. There was one single file on it. Just one. Gamma_attack.exe. I stared at the file name, trying to place it. Gamma Attack? Sounded like an old video game. But I couldn't remember one by that name, and I'd been a pretty dedicated gamer as a kid. I tried to open a file, but as expected, my MacBook couldn't run a decades-old Windows or DOS executable. I'd need an emulator or something to see what this actually was. But the mystery had hooked me completely. What was this file? How had it ended up on a server-grade hard drive? And why was it the only thing saved there? For the first time since my spectacular career implosion, my mind was fully engaged with something other than self-pity. I needed to know what this file was, what it contained. It became my mission. I reached out to Alan at the Vintage Computer Shop, asking if he knew anything about old software called Gamma Attack. He didn't recognize it offhand, but invited me to bring the drive to the Thursday meetup. If anyone would know, it would be that crowd of tech historians and collectors. That night, I dreamed about green text on black screens, about secret code and lost digital treasures. The emptiness that had been my constant companion since leaving Silicon Valley had retreated, replaced by curiosity. As I drifted between sleep and wakefulness, a thought surfaced. Maybe I needed to lose everything to find something that actually mattered. I just didn't know yet what that something was. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I spent the days leading up to the meetup, trying everything I could think of to access that mysterious Gamma_attack.exe file. I set up virtual machines running ancient operating systems, downloaded sketchy emulation software, and even considered finding an actual vintage computer to hook the drive up to directly. Nothing worked. The file remained stubbornly inaccessible, like a digital treasure chest without a key. But my obsession with cracking it open only grew stronger. For the first time since my career implosion, I had something to focus on besides my own failure. The Vintage Computing Meetup was held in the back room of a dive bar called the Electric Lounge. Walking in felt like stepping into another world. A dozen or so people huddled around tables covered with motherboards, CRT monitors, and circuit boards. The air smelled like beer and solder. Alan spotted me and waved me over to a table where 3 guys were deep in debate about the superior design of the Commodore Amiga versus early Macintosh systems. I awkwardly hovered until Alan introduced me as the guy with the mystery drive. Suddenly, I was the center of attention. Everyone wanted to see what I'd brought. I pulled out the IBM drive and placed it on the table like I was presenting evidence at a trial. A gray-haired man with thick glasses and a Digital Equipment Corporation t-shirt picked it up, turning it over in his hands with reverence. His name was Tim, and apparently he was something of a legend in this group, a former hardware engineer who'd worked at IBM in the early 80s. ST412 interface, probably from around 1983 or 84, Tim muttered, examining the connections. These were expensive, enterprise-grade storage, not something you'd find in a home computer. When I mentioned the single executable file, Gamma_attack.exe, the room got surprisingly quiet. Gamma Attack? A thin guy with a patchy beard leaned forward. Like the Gamma Attack? The Lost Atari game. I shrugged, explaining I had no idea what the file actually was. That's when the history lesson began. According to these guys, Gamma Attack was supposed to be the next big thing in video gaming back in 1983, an advanced space shooter for the Atari 2600 that pushed the hardware to its limits. The company developing it, Nexus Gaming, was a small studio founded by ex-Atari engineers who thought they could outdo their former employer. But then came the video game crash of 1983. The market was flooded with terrible games. Consumers lost faith, and countless studios went bankrupt practically overnight. Nexus Gaming was one of the casualties. The story went that a fire destroyed their offices just weeks before Gamma Attack's planned release, and all copies of the game were presumed lost forever. There were rumors one prototype cartridge survived, Tim explained, excitement making his voice quiver slightly. But no one's ever proven it exists. Collectors have been hunting for it for decades. If true, this would be like finding the holy grail of vintage gaming. The only problem? I had an executable file, not a game cartridge. And Atari 2600 games weren't PC executables. They were ROM files designed for specialized hardware. What you probably have is a development build, Tim theorized. The code they were working on before transferring it to cartridge format. Maybe a backup that survived the fire. My mind was spinning. Had I accidentally purchased a legendary lost artifact of gaming history for $5 at a flea market? We spent the rest of the evening trying different approaches to access the file. Someone brought out a laptop running DOS 6.22, and after some tinkering, we managed to at least launch the executable. The screen filled with blocky, colorful text. Gamma Attack, Development Build 0.87, Nexus Gaming, 1983, followed by what looked like a rudimentary menu system. The room erupted in excited chatter. This was real. This was actually the lost game. Over the next few hours, we discovered the file contained not just the game itself, but the entire development environment. Source code, graphics files, sound assets, design documents, everything. It was a complete blueprint for Gamma Attack, preserved perfectly on this enterprise-grade hard drive that had somehow survived untouched for over 4 decades. As the night wound down and people started heading home, Tim pulled me aside. "You realize what you found, right?" His expression was deadly serious. "This isn't just some old game. This is gaming history. Museums would pay a fortune for this. Collectors would go crazy." I hadn't even considered the monetary value. I'd been too caught up in the thrill of solving the mystery. "What do you think it's worth?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Tim removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Hard to say exactly. But the last time a truly rare, unreleased Atari prototype surfaced, it wasn't nearly as legendary as Gamma Attack. It sold for over $200,000. My jaw dropped. $200,000? For a file I'd essentially paid $5 for? I spent the night back at my motel room, unable to sleep, my mind racing with possibilities. I could sell it immediately, cash in, and use the money to restart my life. I could donate it to a museum and become a minor hero in retro gaming circles. Or I could finish what Nexus Gaming started. The source code was all there. With modern tools, I could theoretically complete the game, make it playable on emulators, or even recreate the cartridge as it was meant to be. The next morning, I went down a Reddit rabbit hole, searching for any mentions of Gamma Attack. In our /retro gaming and our /lost media, I found multiple threads discussing the game's mysterious disappearance. There were even conspiracy theories. Some believed the game had been deliberately suppressed because it contained revolutionary programming techniques that competitors wanted to steal. I created a new Reddit account and made a carefully worded post. Found what might be Gamma Attack source code, looking to connect with anyone who worked at Nexus Gaming in the early 80s. Within hours, my inbox exploded. Most messages were from skeptics or excited fans wanting proof. But one message stood out, from a username NexusVet83. I was a junior programmer at Nexus from 1981 to 1983. "If you really found Gamma Attack, I need to talk to you. There's more to this story than people know." I stared at the message for a long time. Whatever path I chose next, I knew my life had just taken a turn I never could have predicted when I bought that hard drive. From unemployed tech has been the discoverer of a legendary lost game, all because I got fired and fled to Reno in disgrace. Funny how life works sometimes. I responded to the message, agreeing to a video call the next day. Whatever happened next, the emptiness that had followed me to Nevada was gone. In its place was something I hadn't felt in years, genuine excitement about what tomorrow might bring. The video call with Nexus Vet 83, whose real name turned out to be Michael Donovan, lasted nearly 3 hours. Michael had been a junior programmer at Nexus Gaming, fresh out of college when he joined the small team working on Gamma Attack. Now in his 60s, he'd long ago moved on to enterprise software development, but the passion in his eyes when he talked about the lost game was unmistakable. "We knew we were creating something special," he explained, leaning into his webcam. "The techniques we developed to squeeze extra performance out of the Atari hardware were revolutionary for time." What fascinated me most was hearing about the team's vision for the game, an immersive space combat simulator with multiple branching paths and endings, which was virtually unheard of for early 80s console games. The story of the fire turned out to be true, but with a twist. According to Michael, there have been rumors of corporate espionage. Competitors try and steal their techniques. The fire had been investigated for potential arson, though nothing was ever proven. "The backup you found, that shouldn't exist," Michael said, his voice laced with amazement. "All our backups were stored on site. Everything was lost in the fire." Over the next couple weeks, I worked with Michael and the group from the Vintage Computing Meetup to resurrect Gamma Attack. We extracted all the files, cataloged the assets, and even got the development build running properly in an emulator. The game was roughly 80% complete, with most core mechanics functioning. The graphics were primitive by today's standards, of course, but for a 1983 Atari title, they were genuinely impressive, colorful, fluid, and created within the severe hardware constraints. Word about our discovery started spreading through the retro gaming community. My Reddit post gained traction, with thousands of upvotes and comments. Gaming history YouTube channels reached out for interviews. A couple of gaming journalists from major websites slid into my DMs asking for exclusive access. The attention was intoxicating after weeks of feeling like a complete failure. Here I was, suddenly relevant again, not for my coding skills or tech leadership, but for accidentally stumbling across a piece of lost history. That's when the first offer came in. The National Video Game Museum in Texas contacted me through their acquisition director. They were interested in purchasing the original hard drive and rights to display the game in their museum. Their initial offer, $120,000. I was stunned. That would cover my living expenses for at least 2 years while I figure out my next career move. But before I could respond, a private collector reached out through Tim, offering $150,000. Then another museum countered with $175,000. Suddenly, I was in the middle of a bidding war for something I'd purchased for $5 at a flea market. The universe has a weird sense of humor sometimes. Michael advised caution. "Whatever you decide to do with it, make sure you maintain some control over the digital rights," he counseled. "Physical artifact are one thing, but the code itself, that's the real treasure." I took his advice to heart, consulting with an intellectual property lawyer to understand my options. Since Nexus Gaming had been defunct for decades and no one had claimed ownership of the code in all that time, the lawyer believed I had a legitimate claim to ownership as a discoverer of abandoned property. Still, he recommended reaching out to any potential stakeholders from the original company to avoid future complications. Michael helped me track down the 2 surviving founders of Nexus Gaming. Both had left the gaming industry after the crash, and neither had any interest in reclaiming ownership of Gamma Attack. They were just amazed and delighted that it had survived. With their blessing and signed affidavits relinquishing any claims, I was free to move forward with a sale. But what had started as a simple question of selling to the highest bidder had evolved into something more complicated. During those weeks of working with the code, I developed a genuine attachment to Gamma Attack. There was something special about this game that had nearly been lost to history. It wasn't just about the money anymore. I wanted to make sure this piece of gaming history was preserved and shared with the world properly. I drafted a proposal. I would sell the physical hard drive and license museum exhibition rights to the highest bidder, but retain the digital rights to potentially finish and publish the game. This approach would give me both immediate financial relief and a potential future project. The Texas Museum ultimately made the winning bid, $380,000 for the physical hard drive and exclusive museum exhibition rights. The contract included provisions allowing me to access the original hardware for research purposes and retain all digital distribution rights for myself. When the wire transfer hit my account, I sat on the edge of my motel bed in shock, staring at my banking app. The balance looked like a glitch. Nearly $400,000 where there had been barely $3,000 just days before. Just like that, I'd gone from unemployed and spiraling to financially secure. All because I bought a random old hard drive while drowning in post-fire and depression. The museum arranged for a specialized courier to collect the drive, using a custom-built shock-proof case with temperature and humidity controls. Watching them carefully pack up the battered old IBM drive, like it was a crown jewels, was surreal. After they left, my motel room felt emptier somehow. For weeks, that drive had been the center of my existence. Now what? The answer came that evening in the form of an email from someone named Jennifer Chun. The subject line immediately caught my attention. Your Stratix Systems departure. My stomach dropped. Jennifer had been one of the lead investors at Stratix, the same investors who had seen my unfortunate screenshot ranting about the CEO. Why was she contacting me now? With shaking hands, I opened the email. David, I've been following your Gamma Attack story with interest. Impressive find. Even more impressive how you've handled it. I always thought you were wasted at Stratix. I'm starting a new venture focused on preserving and revitalizing classic gaming experiences for modern platforms. Your experience with both cutting-edge tech and now classic gaming makes you uniquely qualified. Would you be interested in discussing a partnership? Jennifer, I read the email 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. One of Silicon Valley's most respected investors wanted to work with me? After the way I crashed and burned? The universe really does have a weird sense of humor. 3 weeks ago, I was contemplating whether I'd ever work in tech again. Now I had $380,000 in the bank and a potential new career path that combined my technical background with this newfound passion for gaming history. I typed a response accepting her invitation to talk, then leaned back on my lumpy motel bed, grinning at the water-stained ceiling. Maybe getting fired was the best thing that could have happened to me after all. The coffee shop in downtown San Francisco was buzzing with the typical morning rush. Tech workers hunched over laptops, venture capitalists in Patagonia vests having hushed conversations about burn rates and market fit. 6 months ago, I would have been just another face in this crowd. Now, sitting across from Jennifer Chun, I felt like I'd returned to a familiar country, but as a different person. The way I see it, Jennifer said as she stirred her matcha latte, the retro gaming market is primed for disruption. It's fragmented, underserved, and full of passionate consumers willing to pay premium prices for authentic experiences. Jennifer wasn't what I'd expected. At Stratix, I'd only seen her from a distance during board meetings, an intimidating figure in designer suits who asked brutally efficient questions about our engineering roadmap. In person, she was surprisingly down-to-earth, dressed in jeans and a vintage Pac-Man t-shirt that I strongly suspected was actual 80s merchandise, not a modern reproduction. Her vision was compelling. A studio dedicated to preserving, completing, and respectfully updating classic lost games. Gamma Attack would be our flagship project, but she already had leads on other abandoned titles from the golden age of gaming that could be revitalized. There's a whole generation rediscovering these classics, plus the original fans who now have disposable income, she explained. The key is authenticity combined with just enough modernization to make the games accessible without losing their soul. The meeting lasted 3 hours. By the end, we had the outline of a business plan for what would become Phoenix Gaming Studios, named for the idea of bringing lost games back from the ashes. Jennifer would provide the initial seed funding and business expertise. I would be the technical lead and creative director. We shook hands on the partnership, and I walked out of that coffee shop in a daze. For months after being escorted out of Stratix by security, I was co-founding a company with one of Silicon Valley's most respected investors. The irony wasn't lost on me. If I hadn't accidentally attached that screenshot and gotten fired, I'd never have fled to Reno, never bought that hard drive, never discovered Gamma Attack, never met Jennifer. Sometimes catastrophic failure is just opportunity in disguise. The next few months were a whirlwind. We leased a modest office space in Oakland, more affordable than San Francisco, and with a kind of quirky, artistic vibe that fit our retro-focused mission. I reached out to some of my former colleagues who I knew were talented but underutilized at Stratix, and soon we had a small but mighty team of 6 developers and designers. Michael Donovan, the former Nexus programmer, came on board as consultant. His institutional knowledge about the original vision for Gamma Attack was invaluable as we worked to complete the game that had been abandoned 4 decades earlier. The technical challenges were fascinating. We decided to create 2 versions: a historically accurate recreation that would run on original Atari hardware or perfect emulators, and a subtly enhanced version with optional quality of life improvements for modern platforms. The museum in Texas that had purchased the original hard drive became our partner, providing access to the hardware whenever we needed it and helping promote the project through their channels. They even organized a special exhibition on the lost games of the Golden Age, with Gamma Attack as the centerpiece. As development progressed, we started building buzz in the retro gaming community. The Reddit thread that had started it all became a place where we shared development updates and gathered feedback from enthusiasts. We were transparent about our process, involving the community in decisions about how much to modernize versus how much to preserve the original experience. 8 months after our first meeting with Jennifer, we were ready for release. Gamma Attack Rebirth would launch simultaneously on Steam, GOG, and as a limited edition physical cartridge that would work in original Atari 2600 consoles, a technical feat that our hardware specialists had spent months perfecting. The night before launch, I couldn't sleep. I paced around my new apartment, a modest but comfortable place in Oakland, a significant upgrade from that Reno motel room, wondering if anyone would actually care about this obscure game from 1983 that never saw the light of day. I needn't have worried. The launch exceeded our wildest expectations. The gaming press covered it extensively, with headlines like "Lost Atari Classic Rises from the Ashes" and "The $5 flea market find that launched a studio." Tech blogs picked up the story of my journey from fired Silicon Valley engineer to retro game savior. The limited edition physical cartridges sold out in 3 minutes flat, but the most gratifying response came from players. The Steam reviews flooded in, overwhelmingly positive, with many commenting on how Gamma Attack captured a perfect balance between nostalgic retro charm and just enough modern sensibility to make it accessible. 1 month post-launch, Jennifer called an all-hands meeting. The team gathered in our conference room, anxious about what she might say. In startup land, unexpected all-hands meetings were often harbingers of bad news. Instead, she projected our sales figures on the wall. We'd sold over 200,000 copies across all platforms. The limited edition cartridges were now trading on eBay for 10 times their original price. And we'd received acquisition inquiries from 2 major publishers. "We have a choice to make," Jennifer said. "We can take one of these offers and cash out early, or we can stay independent and build something special on our own terms." The team's response was immediate and unanimous. We were just getting started. There were more lost games to resurrect, more digital history preserve. Jennifer smiled, clearly having anticipated this reaction. "That's what I hoped you'd say. Now, let's talk about our next project." After the meeting, I stayed behind in the office, looking at the framed items on our wall. The original Reddit post that had connected me with the vintage computing community, a photo of the IBM hard drive now safely preserved in the Texas Museum, our first game review, and, somewhat ironically, the termination letter from Stratix that had set this whole journey in motion. Next to my desk sat a small box containing something I had only recently purchased. The original Stratix report that had got me fired. I'd found it being sold as a business case study on how not to handle sensitive communications. Apparently, my mistake had become a cautionary tale taught in business schools. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt grateful. That catastrophic mistake had led me here, to a job I loved, working with people I respected, creating something that brought genuine joy to others. We weren't changing the world in the grandiose way Silicon Valley startups always claim to be, but we were preserving pieces of cultural history that might otherwise have been lost forever. That night, as I locked up the office, I noticed an email notification on my phone. It was from Richard, my former CEO at Stratix. "Saw your game on Steam. Impressive turnaround story. Guess I did you a favor firing you. Any chance you'd consider coming back? We could use someone with your vision. I laughed out loud in the empty office. 6 months ago, that email would send me into an emotional tailspin. Now, it barely registered as a blip on my radar. I typed a quick, polite response declining his offer, then pocketed my phone and headed out. The Oakland evening was cool and clear, the streets alive with people heading to dinners, shows, and bars. As I walked to my car, I pulled out a small object I kept in my jacket pocket as a reminder. The faded business card of that flea market vendor who'd sold me the IBM hard drive. I'd asked for it after making my purchase. Thinking I might need to contact him at the drive turned out to be interesting. On the back, I'd scribbled $5 IBM HD and the date. It was framed now in a small acrylic case, with a handwritten note underneath. Best $5 investment I ever made. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you're really looking for. Sometimes getting fired isn't the end of your story. It's just the inciting incident. And sometimes the most valuable things in life are sitting on a folding table at a dusty flea market, just waiting for the right person to come along and see their true worth. $5 for a hard drive that changed my entire life trajectory. From rock bottom to running my own successful studio. Worth every penny.